Hi everyone. In today's lecture, we're going to be talking about play and peers. So I first wanted to start off by sharing a little bit about what is play. And there are many different definitions of what play is, and this article has more elements of play. And it's wonderful to hear from many different perspectives, but I wanted to share a little bit about the definition from Maria Montessori and her ideas on play. I think she has some great things to say. She talks about how play is self-chosen and that you as the player get to direct the activity and the type of play that you're going to be engaging in, and the end result does not matter. It's really about the process of play, so that process over product and valuing the means more than the end. So really emphasizing that the journey of play is going to be more beneficial than what happens at the end, and guided by mental rules. So this is what we want. We are creating the rules. There's no one on the outside who's telling us what to do or how to do it. We get to guide and dictate our play. And so, for example, for thinking about children engaging in dramatic play, everyone gets to decide who the roles are going to be, and they get to create and define and sustain their play amongst the people that are in it. And we often see that play is imaginative and it's non-literal, so this is an opportunity and a time and place for you to do things outside of your ordinary life and step into an imaginative and creative space beyond your rudimentary work or school. And we see also that play creates feelings of happiness, relaxation, and you're really in an enjoyable state of mind during play. There are several different types of play, so we're not going to be talking in this lecture about physical and object play. We're going to be emphasizing social play, but if you are currently taking or have taken or will take in the future CD 3304, Playing Best Practice with Children, you'll learn more about all different types of play. So let's talk a little bit about social play. So we see that children are roughly the same age when they start to interact with one another, and there are rules and structures that are again created by the children, and we see that there's an emphasis on imagination, and pretend play is one of the first steps of engaging with others socially. And we also start to see that children are beginning the stages of cooperative games. And so we might see that children are playing house or a game of tag. These are some common types of social play that we might see. All right, so now let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of different types of social play and what they look like roughly around these age groups. So we see that from birth to around 2 years old, children are engaging in unoccupied play. So this is typically where we see that they're not really playing because it's kind of the beginning stages of life, especially for our newborns or infants. They're often being held, sleeping, eating, being changed. So much is done with caregiving routines, but around the first few months, you can definitely start to incorporate elements of play, bringing in materials. And so we see that children are primarily interacting with their caregivers here. So there's not a lot of social play with others. It's mainly interactions with caregivers. But we do start to see that children can interact with others when prompted by adults, and around 1 year old, this is typically when they're more aware of others. And so we see that children around 2 to 3 years old are more engaged in solitary play. And I wanted to emphasize that these are just rough estimates of when you'll see this type of play occurring. But children can engage in solitary play at any point. Think about yourself as an adult. Sometimes we like to do things with other people, and sometimes we like to do stuff on our own. And so we might see children engaging in solitary play at different ages, but we typically see more solitary play and onlooker play occurring around 2 to 3 years old. So playing by themselves, kind of doing their own thing. So they're just not as interested in other children. But again, caregivers and adults can be a great way for children to have beginning stages of interacting with other people, but typically on their own, they're going to play more by themselves or with a caregiver. They're also watching other children to see what they're doing during play, and they might mimic or copy this, but typically doing things on their own, in their own zone, as we might call it. And then around 2, we also see that parallel play is starting to come forth. So around the same time as onlooker play, where we're watching other children and seeing what they're doing, this is when children are playing in the same space, doing the same thing. So maybe they're in the sandbox, they're both digging, they're at the sensory table, and they're both smushing Play-Doh together. And so they're playing alongside, doing the same thing. But they're not necessarily interacting with one another. But like I said, caregivers can be a great way to help children to, if they're not already noticing others during this time, to create instances where we can all dig and scoop into a big bucket together. So then we are encouraging cooperation and playing with one another earlier on for those children. And then we also see that associative play around 3 to 4 is beginning to come online. So low levels of interaction with other children. They might hand other children toys. They might have small instances where they're working together. And this is often prompted by the adult, but keep in mind, depending on the type of home environment that a child has, they might have lots of siblings, and so they're already starting to play together more frequently. Or if you're at a child care center where the emphasis really is on everyone playing together and creating lots of opportunities for children to engage in small groups, you are going to see that they're going to engage more socially earlier on. But ideally, cooperative play where teamwork starts to show through and there's thoughtful, planned intentions behind the interactions doesn't start to show until around the preschool ages. So this is when we see that there are leaders and followers to the play, and there's larger dynamics in what children are doing and their creations, the imagination during their play. They're starting to produce ideas and create diverse dynamics, and they're more in depth in regard to the play scene, and so this is going to be more emphasized when they're interacting with other people. On this slide, I just wanted to share a little bit about the developmental progression of social play. So we're looking at areas where potentially intervention might be needed. And unfortunately, many people do worry about when children are engaging in solitary and parallel play. But as I mentioned earlier, there's no large need to be concerned because this is typical of this age group, and non-social play can happen when children are older too. So there is a good balance between alone time and social time. So just really thinking about that in your own experiences as an adult. And older children should be using their alone time when they are engaging more constructively, whereas younger children are going to be experiencing more manipulation and sensory exploration of objects. And dramatic play can happen alone too. So we often think that in the dramatic play center or that area that we're supposed to be engaging socially with others, and this is not always true. We can do something active and intentional by ourselves. So I could go and cook a meal for my baby doll and get the food ready and prepare it all by myself. So again, thinking about in your own life, you do not have to eat a meal or prepare a meal with other people. You could do that. You could get dressed and take a walk or do things by yourself. So can children. On this slide, this is just a little bit about who children might be playing with. So a little bit about the creation and stages of friendships. So when children are around 3, they start to develop friendships with others, and around 4 to 5 years old, children start to be more exclusive in their peer groups for their close friends and people who have similar attributes to them, and start to show interest in others who are similar to them in the way that they look and the way that they play, the types of toys that they like, and it's a more enduring relationship and more meaningful based on the complexity of their interactions. So I did want to switch gears a little bit because I think that this is an important aspect to talk about when we're thinking about play and peers is challenging behavior. And so I wanted to share a little bit about what the National Institute for the Early Education Research says. So this quote talks about a challenging behavior is any repeated pattern of behavior that interferes with learning or engagement in social interactions. And so this is showing the emphasis that challenging behavior can interfere with not only play, but also interactions with others. And the key piece here is that it's repeated patterns of behavior. So we often see behavior sometimes as a challenge for us, or we have a little bit of a harder time working and figuring out how to handle a certain situation or behavior. But in this lecture, I want to talk about extreme challenging behaviors. So not just typical things that might present challenges for you, like toddlers biting or hitting, or reluctant preschoolers, or elementary school children and teenagers who might lie, because in reality, all children exhibit behaviors that can present challenges, and so do adults. Human beings can be challenging, but there are some behaviors that are more prevalent and persistent, and repetitive challenging behaviors are something that happen over and over again, and this strongly impacts children's abilities to play and interact with one another. And so we see that 10 to 30% of children in classrooms, so about 20 children, in a classroom of 20 children, 2 to 6 of them are going to experience extreme challenging behaviors. And this can be in a range from mild to moderate levels. And unfortunately, 50% of infants and toddlers display challenging behaviors, and they show the same behaviors later on in elementary school years, and they're not outgrowing the behaviors. And this definitely presents a concern for development. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next few slides. On this slide and the next slide, I'm sharing a variety of different examples of what challenging behavior might look like. So remember, we are using the National Institute for Early Education Research understanding of challenging behavior, and that it's repetitive and it happens over and over again, and it strongly impacts children's abilities to play and interact with others. It's not just typical behavior for the age or the stage, because we all exhibit behaviors that are challenging. But I want you to also think about how, in general, behavior is a way for children and human beings to communicate. And so when looking at children's behaviors, ask yourself these questions when you're thinking about the behavior and breaking down the reason why. Is this not typical for the child's age group? Does this happen frequently? Does it interrupt play? So if it's not age typical, if it does interrupt play, and if it is happening frequently, then most likely the child is communicating to you that there's an unmet need and that they need more support. And so, for example, the first one here, physical aggression such as hitting, kicking, punching, spitting, throwing objects forcefully. If this is not typical for the age group, if this happens frequently, and if it's strongly interrupting play, the child has an unmet need and they need more support. And my mom had shared a story with me about a similar experience based on the first example here from when she was working with young children. There was a child in a respective classroom, not in the one that she worked at, but at the center she was working at. And this child displayed atypical, frequent, and persistent challenging behaviors that disrupted their play and their ability to interact with other people, including teachers, based on hitting, kicking, throwing. So this was in a kindergarten classroom, and this child displayed strong feelings of anger multiple times a day, which was atypical for a 5-year-old child. And they were extremely aggressive towards staff, and they often threw furniture. And my mom had let me know that one of the teachers was an ex-military guy, I guess a pretty large man who, again, has an ex-military background. And this child broke the fingers of this teacher during a time of restraint. And so, as you can see, based on the evidence that I provided of the child's kind of day-to-day and those examples, This is not typical behavior. It's clearly happening frequently, and it's interrupting their ability to play and build connections. And remember, we're thinking about play as a time for happiness, relaxation, and feelings of joy. And so this child was displaying often feelings of strong anger, and they tried to sometimes separate this child into a different room to calm down. And from hearing her experience on this story, that it was extremely difficult. And so again, I want you to look at the examples on this slide as well as the next slide. And if you are ever observing children, looking and seeing, are any of these behaviors occurring frequently? Are they atypical? And are they interrupting play? On this slide, I wanted to share a little bit about some reasons that children might display challenging behaviors. So, like I mentioned on the previous slide, children are trying to communicate through their behavior, and we often see that children we often see that children may need additional intervention if they have a special need that is not being addressed appropriately. And so, although many teachers are wonderful, not everyone is trained to be able to work with children who do have special needs. And so, we might need to provide children with additional services to best support them. And then, when we're thinking about temperament, each person, everybody in the world has their own style of how they interact with the world, interact with people and places and new things. And so goodness of fit for children and caregivers is really important. And this also goes along with your parenting style, figuring out your parenting style. And if you're a good fit for the child's temperament and how they interact with the world, is important to recognize. And so you might not even realize that the type of guidance that you're providing based on your parenting style could be exacerbating the situation related to challenging behavior. Same with stress and frustration. We often have many elements in our lives, whether it's personal work or our own mental health, whatever it might be, that cause stress and frustration. And so then this can lead to us not being able to best meet the communication that the child is trying to display through their behaviors, and leading into more stress related to toxic stress, trauma, and ACEs. Unfortunately, children who are trying to show you through their behaviors that they're struggling is sometimes due to factors in their lives that are out of their control. And so when children are living in home environments that have unimaginable abuse or gun violence, or parents who have substance use that is out of their control, children are going to be often struggling and present challenging behaviors, and their behaviors truly are a cry for help, and they're trying to figure out ways to cope with the unmanageable stress in their lives. And so I encourage you to check out this video here that talks a little bit more about some of these points connected to reasons for challenging behavior. On this slide, I wanted to share a bit about outcomes of challenging behavior. So it's important that, again, we're paying attention to children's challenging behaviors, and just in general that we're paying attention to behavior. So that way we can differentiate extreme challenging behaviors, again, that are persistent, that interrupt play, and that are happening frequently, as opposed to just typical behaviors that can be challenging. And so differentiating true challenging behaviors that need more immediate attention and intervention, and behaviors that we can help to guide children through, that they will eventually be able to develop strategies for. And so unfortunately, there are potential negative outcomes developmentally when children are displaying challenging behaviors. And so this article talks about both the negative and positive outcomes for when we do and do not address challenging behaviors. And as I mentioned on the previous slide with ACEs and stress, this not only can impact children and create behaviors that are challenging, but it can lead to severe behavioral problems and can indicate long outcomes in life related to delinquency and gang violence and gangs in the teen years, and preschool expulsion rates are at an extreme high. So they're 3.2 times the rate of K to 12 students, which is extremely insane for the age group, and we need to manage this and really address that trauma leads to behavior problems, and we need to create better relationships with children and create opportunities to support their needs sooner rather than later. On this slide, I just wanted to share some strategies that we might think about when addressing children who are experiencing challenging behaviors. And the first one is checking in on your own behaviors. So remember, we talked about parenting style or even just teaching style, temperament, and stress and frustration. So really checking in on how you interact with the world, the type of guidance that you provide, and your own behaviors. So your reactions to children or how you interact to certain situations, and also addressing the environment. So sometimes the environment can play a key role in whether or not a challenging behavior is to be present. So if children have sensory issues, for example, and you have bright lights or loud noises, this could cause them to scream excessively in the classroom. And if you are not acknowledging your own behaviors in addition to the environment, you would be lacking knowledge and understanding of what that child might need and what they're trying to communicate, that they're uncomfortable, that this is hurting their body, and that they need help in changing the environment in order to best address their needs. And then in addition, we also want to check out different aspects of ways to educate ourselves and to learn. So there's a link here to a great book that helps you to understand more about trauma-informed care and really focusing on how to address children who are experiencing trauma. So I highly recommend checking that out if you're able to. And then also we can look about intervention services. So the Center on the Social Emotional Foundations for Early Learning helps us to understand why children might exhibit challenging behaviors, helps us to have knowledge and skills to better support children. So this tiered graphic here on the right-hand side helps you to look at different levels. So the blue level is the foundation, and it looks at how every child deserves a high quality, safe, and supportive environment and relationships that are going to be beneficial to their learning and their safety and are kind and considerate. So this is something that we need to do for everyone, not just children who experience trauma, not just children who have special needs, but for everybody. But moving up on the pyramid, we see that some more intervention might be set in. And the green level has intensive strategies that might be used. So children who are in neighborhoods that have extreme gun violence, and that gun violence in their neighborhood leads to a trigger in the classroom when it gets loud. We might implement noise canceling headphones. We might also create a safe space area for them to go to when they need it. And then when we're looking at the red level, that top tier, this is the most intensive intervention. So we were looking at some targeted support. So noise canceling headphones, a safe space, those could be for children who have extreme, needs related to trauma or special needs, but it also could work for other children as well. A safe space could be great when children are just having a hard time. But the red level is looking at children who might need one-on-one support or outside intervention beyond just the classroom. So this could be occupational therapy or physical therapy or just additional time outside with someone to work one-on-one. But we're specifically thinking about for this top tier, we're looking at social and emotional area needs. So we might be working with children in behavioral therapy or family therapy, so different aspects related to social and emotional development. Alrighty, so last but not least, I wanted to share some ways to facilitate play and social interaction. So this is just a wrap up for you. So just reminders on promoting play and how we want to make sure that we're giving suggestions to children and making comments, providing support when needed, and really emphasizing the element of inclusion and how it's extremely key. And you can even invite consults to your classroom. So California Inclusion and Behavior Consultation, I've included the link here. And so thinking about when we might need to support children who are experiencing outside factors that are impacting their play and creating challenging behaviors. We might think about how to include consultation. So this is ways to work with you, not the children. So working with you on what you can do better and how you can facilitate more play and interactions, and coming in to promote different strategies that you might use. And so really just thinking about being inclusive, planning thoughtful activities, creating a wide range of opportunities for children for play with not only objects but their peers. So I hope you enjoyed today's lecture, and I will talk to you next time. Bye, everyone.